So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this especially exciting Football Friday for our second conversation of the Tom Mendoza Presents series. I know that many of you were here with us a few weeks ago when we kicked off this series with an insightful and exciting conversation between Tom Mendoza and Carl Aschenbach. Today, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome back Tom and to welcome today's special guest, Jayshree Ullal. We are thrilled to have Tom with us as both an extraordinary alum of this university and a great friend to Notre Dame. To have him lead this new series featuring his conversations with some of the great industry leaders of our time. Tom Mendoza really doesn't need any introduction as the former vice chairman and president of NetApp, now a Fortune 500 company with over 1 billion in revenue, thanks to his leadership. Let me simply express my continued gratitude for his friendship and support for our college and our university. Thank you so much, Tom. And also thank you, Jayshree, for being with us here today. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Martin. So let me give Jayshree a little introduction. From her career started as an engineer in the semiconductor business. Then she moved on to the business side. We'll talk a little bit about that at a startup called Crescendo, which became the first acquisition ever by Cisco Systems and the most successful acquisition in history of Cisco, maybe by any tech company. Changed the entire company. Jayshree led that group, built a $5 billion business, got promoted to senior vice president of all data center switches, built that into a $15 billion business. Now, if most people had that on their resume, we'd be done. That's pretty good. But Jayshree wanted to be a CEO. She knew she could be a CEO. But even then, she could have gone to any kind of existing company. There were all kinds of opportunities, but she chose to do a startup with a brilliant gentleman that worked for a legend in Silicon Valley himself, Andy Bechtolsheim. But it was a raw startup, a small startup. In fact, she asked me to speak at her kickoff 1 year after starting in 2008. And we could, as I said to her earlier, we could have had it in a phone booth. It was a small group of people. And then I went back 10 years later at her invitation and spoke at her sales kickoff in Orlando. And it was a very large group, very large company. She's created a market, cloud networking. They're worth $19.5 billion now, market cap for another great quarter. And she's recognized by Barron's as one of the top 20 CEOs in the world 2 years ago. And by Fortune last year as one of the top 20 business people in the world. Phenomenal person is really what I'd say. So Jayshree Ullal, my friend, welcome.
Tom, thank you. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for that introduction. I sound more glorious than I really am.
That's the goal. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from. And I really would like you to share the story about your dad and his influence on you about the focus on education.
Absolutely. I have a very humble background, very, very middle class, almost poor. My dad was a physicist and he had two daughters, and he really believed that the two daughters were, he would push us to achieve great things. When I came back from a math test with 99%, he'd say, "Where's the other 1%?" So he had big beliefs in us. I was born and raised in London for the first 5 years. In India, I went to a very, very strict Catholic school where you speak when spoken to. I'm still defying that. Great school. And my dad was an educationist, so he really impressed that foundation on us, which is why I'm so drawn to speaking at these kind of events, because Notre Dame is such a hallmark. He created the top 5 IITs, the engineering institutions, which are really now Ivy League global, back in the 1950s and 60s, and the top 2 Indian Institutes of Management, which is the MBA equivalent of what you all know. Back in that era, and was government funded, and it was all done on merit. There were no classes, there were no other way to get in except merit. So that foundation clearly influenced me, and I am who I am because of my parents.
So you chose engineering as your first profession. You got your degree in engineering and management engineering, and you were very successful at it in a tough market. Semiconductors, a tough industry, I should say. And then you chose to break out of that, do a startup, and move to the business side. You became on the marketing side. Why'd you make that decision?
Yeah, it's actually a tough decision because when you look at how we're raised. You're always told, be a good doctor or lawyer or engineer. And I was clearly a good engineer, but I would say I was not a great engineer. And everyone should find what they're great at, not just what they're good at, right? And what I found through my engineering career was I got a natural high when I could solve customer problems. I still remember the semiconductor chip when the customer was literally screaming into my ear and asking me to solve this problem with the memory chip that wasn't working. And it was a complicated problem. It was tied to temperature and voltages and burn-in. But a few weeks later, we solved the problem. And, both his temperature and went down and it went from an angry customer to a smile on his face. And I think that was a turning point for me along with my mentors. And I said, the world of interdisciplinarian fields means you want to be an expert and you want to have a foundation, but is there any way I can take my engineering foundation to other fields? And that really became the start of my product planning and then marketing career.
And then you go to Crescendo. Tell the story of Crescendo. And Cisco buys you. You were 13 million in revenue. Is that
Yeah,
the right one?
right. Very small.
And Cisco is about 600 million. If you guys know, Cisco's a gigantic company now. And what happened in the next few years at Crescendo?
Yeah, no, Crescendo was your typical Silicon Valley startup funded by some of the world's best venture capitalists, Sequoia, Mayfield, Redpoint, IVP. And the company was actually doing well. We were building FDDI 100, at that time it was considered a lot, 100 megabit network. And we were not looking at exit strategies. We were not looking at an acquisition. We started talking to Cisco at that time. John Morgridge was the CEO. John Chambers was the head of sales. Ed Cozell was in charge of business development. And they were really falling in love with our technology for a partnership. And then one day they came to us and said, well, we want to partner so closely with you that we don't want to just date. We want to get married. And believe it or not, for most of us, that was both a surprise, a shock, and actually brought tears of sadness and emotion to us because we were really looking to build a company. But we also recognized that 1 + 1 could be far greater than 2 or 10. And I still remember, as part of the acquisition, we had to sign a document that said, you will be with us 2 years. And I thought, 2 years, that's such a lifetime. It's so long. We went on to become 15 years at Cisco. Mario, who was the CEO, Luca, Prem, myself. And I think we always visited our goals 2 years at a time. And we remember staring at their market cap at that time, which was 6 billion, and the company was aspiring to hit 1 billion. And both John Chambers and John Morgridge said to me, we want you to be $1 billion company. And I thought, that's a very audacious goal. How are we ever going to hit it? But the support, the autonomy, and the level of commitment Cisco really put to its acquisitions, especially since we're the first one, they knew if the first one didn't succeed, there wouldn't be any others. So I think that was an important turning point.
And you got it to $1 billion in 4 years, correct?
Yeah, no, 3 years actually. The first year was 40, the second year was 365, and the third was 1 billion. And it was the whole, today we talk about the cloud. At that time, it was the whole advent of the World Wide Web that completely changed the way networking became mission critical.
So what did you learn personally out of that?
I think it's a very good question. I think in Silicon Valley, if you talk to entrepreneurs, it's very difficult for entrepreneurs to cross the chasm and become executives because people think of it as either or. You can build technology or you can become a corporate executive. Probably my greatest lesson I've learned from that is how you can still remain an entrepreneur at heart and grow that entrepreneurial journey in a corporate executive role. So, lead from the front, be an expert in your field, and use your strengths in technology or entrepreneurship or engineering to create that next billion. So we did it the unconventional way. I did not dream of a career being an executive. It happened to us as a result of our execution. And so we got to put our own signature on it.
I asked you just in chatting, I said, did you see yourself as a future CEO when you first became an engineer? You said, I just wanted a job. That's right. How I wanted.
And my first job was, 24,000 a year, and I just needed a job and an immigration status. So it started with very small beginnings.
So in your role at Cisco, though, you eventually rose up and you personally led 20 or more acquisitions or mergers, big ones a lot of times, but or small, but very successful. Cisco is considered the best acquisition company ever in tech. I don't think there's any dispute. When you looked at a young company and you were thinking of, and you made a decision, we're going to go or no go, what was the primary thing you looked at?
That's a really good question. Most people would tell you technology, and indeed we looked for that, but I would say culture. If we could look at the eyeballs of the entrepreneurs and executives and know they wanted to be there, and know they wanted to make a difference, and know that they had the loyalty to stick it out through thick and thin and make their company great and the acquiring company greater, that was more important. Because frankly, technology changes every so often, but the commitment to make the technology great takes people, takes a set of human beings who aren't just chasing the next thing or aren't just looking for a mercenary outcome, but really want to build a product line or a company.
And did you typically leave them autonomous, or how did you meld them? What it became one Cisco over time, but how did you
Yeah.
treat that?
Yeah.
Was it different for each one, or did you have a
There were
same way?
there were certainly uniquenesses in each one, but I think there was a common thread and recipe. You certainly give them the autonomy for their expertise. After all, you bought them for something you didn't have, and you've got to respect what they have. On the other hand, you also want to tell them, hey, as a standalone, you could have only achieved so much, but think of the 10x, how you can make 1 plus 1 10, you can achieve if you take advantage of the acquiring company's customers, resources, leverage. So I think it's this very fine, delicate balance between autonomy and appropriate integration. And I think one of the things that always impressed me about the acquisitions we did is they knew that I had sat in their shoes, that I had gone through the ups, the downs, the trials and tribulations of being acquired. Because you feel like you lose your identity, you feel like you've lost something. But when you can turn that loss into a gain is your real advantage. So most of the time it was a combination of two. And a lot of times it's also making quick decisions. You do not want to lose that startup's energetic, nimble, agile way of making decisions.
Yeah.
So even if, and supporting them through that is important.
So here you are, a monster success beyond what you would have dreamt initially. I'm talking about 15
Yeah,
years in.
well beyond. Absolutely.
You're running a huge business. I know for a fact, because I knew you well at the time, that you were incredibly respected by everybody. And you make the decision to leave. Now, that had to be hard.
Yeah, very hard. Very, very hard.
How did you come to that?
It was combination of multiple things. I had been at Cisco for almost all my prime years. I'd been there 15 years, and John and I were very close, and I was very close to the team. And loyalty is both a strength and a weakness. Loyalty definitely kept me there, but I had this incredible energy or itch, you may want to say, to do it again. And while you can do a lot of things, you really can't be the CEO. There can only be one in a company, right? So and I didn't know what it was going to be when I left. In fact, I didn't think it was going to be networking. I evaluated a lot of clean tech and battery and solar and different types of fields before I came right back to networking and the cloud. But the decision was probably one of the most difficult ones I made because I was not running away from something. I love Cisco
Right.
and I love the team there. But it was more about my personal goal to run something rather than run away from something. And I didn't know what it was. And the decision took me the better part of 6 to 12 months to make. It wasn't easy.
And how did you land? Again, you just commented you could have gone to a completely different field. That would have been a choice. And you came back to something that you knew really, really well. Some people don't want to keep doing the same thing.
That's
Why
right.
did you make that decision?
Well, I think looking at all these clean tech and battery and solar companies taught me that I don't have a PhD in that. It would take me years to be one, and I wasn't one of those typical professional CEOs that could not know the technology and still run it. So, just from my own characteristic and nature, I really wanted to master what I knew. Um, and yet, at the same time, I didn't want to go back to networking. The fascination of Arista was it wasn't quite just networking. It was repurposed for the cloud. So I was really drawn to that. And probably a really other big thing was you get to work with people you know and love. And there's no substitute for that, especially when you're doing a startup and there's so many variables and so many risks. So what drew me was, that combination of repurposing my networking skills and working with people I knew that I didn't have to, you know, decide the culture. It was already predefined, and I knew I could step into it and accelerate it.
Well, one of the things that was different about Arista at the beginning, number one, when you went there, I think you said there were 30 engineers. It wasn't like
Yeah.
it wasn't like a well-baked plan. They're just really, really smart guys that had an idea. Is that fair?
An idea and a great software stack.
Yeah,
That's what drew
yeah.
me.
And
Fantastic.
they're brilliant people. I mean,
Absolutely.
legendarily today. And then, but I mean, you're walking into that. Tell the story of your first customer.
Yeah. So I walk into it, and we had a very humble office. Arista was located at the basement of a law building that was 100 years old. By the way, the law building went under, and we've gone on to become something else. So we had rented their shelving area where they decided to remove the shelving files, and we were kind of there. And we were struggling. The go-to-market for any startup is not easy, especially against a dominant market leader like Cisco. And what uh, we started looking at, what are the use cases? And I always had a vision to the cloud, but this is 2008. The cloud was barely happening. And in fact, Azure didn't even exist. Amazon had some S3 storage. So that's how early back it was, right? So we focused onto high frequency trading and predictable low latency. And we decided that would be a great use case. And my very first customer win in September or October of 2008 was Lehman Brothers. I'm so happy with it. And anybody know what happened to Lehman Brothers? Bankrupt. Right. So it was the very first customer win was a very ominous start for me. And from there, we had to go create more. Thankfully, the Lehman assets went on to go become part of Barclays. Barclays became an important customer, and we finally got paid many years later. And we're still trying to find serial number one in their museum somewhere. But good times come after a lot of tough times. And
Well,
so
you also had your former employer and your great friend, John Chambers, made the decision to sue Arista very early, very
Yeah.
publicly,
Yeah.
because you were right in his way. And he was right. And
that wasn't easy.
and
John
you
and I
battled
had
your
to
way
separate.
through it.
John and I definitely had to separate personal friendship from professional rivalry at that point. A lot of respect for him, and we go back many years, and we'll go many years ahead. But those were very tough years because basically the attack on Arista was very personal. It was like you've taken our CLI code, which, by the way, it's a lawsuit we won. You've infringed patents. And because it was done in the court of ITC, they could stop our shipments and hurt our customers. So it was a very dangerous lawsuit. And our whole team, spearheaded by even not only our general counsel, but even our board members, really navigated 4 tough years.
So here you are, your company's phenomenally successful. Everyone wants to be like Arista now in that space. There's no more, you're chasing somebody. And one of the things about you that people would say is that you're a great team builder. I mean, throughout your career, they'd also say you're tough, by the way. Is that
Yes,
fair?
I think the tough is what they'd say first before the team building.
I had it the wrong order. But what did you look for in creating the teams that have been so successful? What's the number one or two things that you look for in building a team?
Well, a great chef, a great football coach, we all need the right ingredients. The first thing you look for is a complement of yourself. Can your strengths be complemented by other folks' strengths, or can your weaknesses be covered by others, right? So I think we really built a team of extremely brilliant individuals and strengths where each of them, in my view, have the opportunity to be a CEO themselves, but instead chose to double down on their strength, put aside their ego. So everyone has low ego and high strength and really work together as a team. And that's my favorite kind of recipe. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm tough, but if we set a goal and we all do it together, it really is a team Arista. I think that's a very, very key ingredient. You hear of so many startups where there's ego, the founders are fighting, there's this lack of direction. So I really believe in the argue, debate, align, and find people stronger than you to make the team stronger. And I think that's that that is the only way and the best way to build greatness, because no one individual can be great by themselves. And I think that's been a strong tenet.
One of your quotes that I love is you said that we focus on the journey, not the destination.
Yes, absolutely. It's so easy to get trapped by the next quarter or how well you did, but it's more difficult to step back and say, are you building the right foundation of your software? Are you doing the right thing for your customers? One of our almost near death experiences in the company is when we had to do a recall of a chip that had some bit error rate problems. And we could have fixed it with temporarily with software, but we did the right thing. And it cost us millions of dollars and nearly went us go under before we went public. And even today, the customers don't just remember how great our products are, they remember that we bore the cost of that recall. So it was back to the not just the destination, but the journey. And it's easier said than done because it's so easy to take the shortcut. But I think if you want to build a quick hit, you can certainly take look at the destination. But if you want to build a long-lasting experience, you have to have all pillars: the right technology, the right customers, and most importantly, the right team and culture.
I think Cisco is renowned, and certainly you as part of that, as being very customer centric, very customer centric. I called on the same customers from a different place for storage. And if they talked about Cisco, they said they are so zeroed in on making sure I'm successful. That seems to be something you carried over to Arista from my interactions with all the Arista team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, through the lawsuit and through many of our trials and tribulations, the reason we emerged stronger is because our customers stood by us. I still remember one customer saying, our plan A is Arista, our plan B is no more Cisco because they sued you, right? So we had that kind of loyalty to us, and we
Yep.
returned that. Now, by the way, sometimes the customer may have a different idea or a different view. Doesn't mean they're not right, but we had the right engagement to say, "Hey, this is the what we're doing, and maybe you want to do something different, and we can work with other vendors." So being open and multi-vendor and customer driven didn't mean we did everything they wanted.
Right. No, that's a great point. That certainly does not mean that, but you listen to them and you
That's
have the dialogue. So
right.
if you had to think about your life and you said there were certain decisions you made that really, really had a major impact on why you are where you are today, what do you think the top 3 or 4 decisions you've made were?
Well, at a top three or four, maybe a longer list, I'll give you the top one. It's the
Okay.
support system. The number one, I would say, is the support system around me. When you look at my family, my husband, my two lovely daughters, my parents and their influence, and my Arista team, especially now we're all in COVID, I think I've come to appreciate that even more as a foundational fundamental to who I am and why we all are where we are. We can all talk about success, and sometimes success comes when you don't work as hard, or it comes when you're lucky, or it comes with right timing. But the foundational pillar to that success, and it goes back even to my professors in my undergrad who shaped me, I think it's my people. And I am who I am because of them. And I really mean that.
One of the things that you do very well, and I think both of us align on this, is we built networks of people that are almost like family. We can call them when we need to. We don't have to call them all the time. But and today that's a little tougher. Younger people are more on social media and stuff and less on how did you build your network? Because you have a phenomenal network. You would agree with that. I mean, there are people that you trust, they trust you. If you needed them, you could call, both in business and I'm assuming personally. But what was the keys to building that network?
Well, I think you and I come from the same generation. We're not the iPhone generation, right?
Right.
So a lot of our network was built eyeball to eyeball. I've I guess I've built it from being around for 4 decades in the Silicon Valley, right? Age has definitely had an advantage to how long I've built the network. But I think it's about this genuine combination back to, I loved engineering, but I loved the intersection between people and engineering more. So the network came naturally to me, and we had a high school reunion that I went back to a few years ago, and I realized even there, gosh, there was a network there too of my friends who knew me from back in their teenage years, right? So my network has evolved, but it starts from always having an inner circle of family and friends that I've truly enjoyed being with, and then a professional circle of friends that I've truly enjoyed working with. And I think it's just something that's, part of who I am.
Mhm.
And even as we've moved to the texting and video and collaboration, it still feels great to pick up the phone and speak to people, and have that dialogue and interaction that's two-way as opposed to
Yeah,
um, the way it's social media. And not to say they don't have their place, they both do.
right.
And but
But it's
uh,
important to build that network. It's important that, we're talking to students here, a lot of students who are just going to be beginning this journey, right? And I think one of the messages I believe in is, especially a place like Notre Dame, people are open to helping you. The professors are open to meet with you, your alumni. You want to get out and meet as many people as you can who can help you eventually and give you advice. I always
right.
say, don't learn. People say you can learn from your own mistakes. I'd rather learn from somebody else's. In general.
So true. You can
In
make new
general.
mistakes,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you can do both, right?
Right. If you were going to give advice to, assume that people watching are either undergrad or graduates and they're getting ready to launch their careers, what would you say? What are the two or three things that that would make a difference that you would advise them?
Well, I'm an example of having gone to a perfectly ordinary college and having had a very middle class background, right? So I would say find your dream and find what you're not just good at, but excellent at, right? And some it takes a while. I'm not saying that we all know, but you all have a gift. Each and every one of you have a gift. And the gift may not necessarily be in the area you started with, and you may have to evolve. So I ask you to keep trying, keep looking, and find that gift that you are a PhD in. The second thing I tell you, in today's world, even if you have a gift, I think the interdisciplinarian fields are more important. When I look at what Notre Dame has done in that area, and I'm very impressed by that, and what you as students can do, I ask you all to seek not just what your gift is, but how you connect the dots on your gift with other areas. Because if you're an engineer, you might have to learn some business. If you're a computer science, you might want to learn something about data science and analytics. If you're in marketing, you might want to study how lead generation is done today, which is very different from picking up the phone. So the real world experiences that you are all looking forward to do is accumulated through a solid academic foundation, but also taking the classes that will allow you to connect the dots. And then, as Tom said, getting advice, getting as much advice. And advice is mostly generally free. You can throw away the parts you don't think apply to you and take in the ones that do. And I think that absorption of these three, if you will, pillars of the triangle, I think will make you stronger and make you realize who you are and what you'll be excellent at.
What you're saying is music to Martin's ears. I know, because when I've talked to him about what he's doing with the business school, having coding be a part of it, he wants them to get a very rounded view of business, not just a specific view. When people come out of school and they're going to launch their career, or even internships and things like this, what advice would you give them on what kind of companies to look for? How do you find the right company? What do you think through?
I think finding the right company when you're looking at an internship is somewhat important, but not the most important. Look for the type of role in the company, because you're not at a point yet where you're trying to decide
Yeah.
based on whether the company's successful or not. Brand doesn't matter, but your role matters. And so you may get what you want in a startup where you can wear multiple hats, or you may get what you want in a larger company where you're looking for that structured learning, or in a mid-size where you may get a little bit of both. And the second thing I'd look for a lot is not just the scope of the role, but the right mentorship. It's so easy to go into these internship programs and just, check email. And I think it's so important to get the most you can out of those 2, 3 months. I'm reminded of my first internship at PG&E. Anybody know the Pacific Gas and Electric Company in the West Coast? They service all of us. My role was to power and come up with the electrical distribution for all of Moscone Center, which was one big dug up piece of land and hole at that time. And so my job was to actually come up with the electrical distribution and then go from manhole to manhole to verify the power and the current and the voltage in each one. But because it was a unionized role, I could not drive to each manhole. I had a PG&E truck driver take me to each one, and then I'd wear my helmet and go down the manhole, measure all of it, and come up, and then be driven another 100 yards. But you can see that that experience has stuck with me because it was the first time I realized, oh, I'm converting my academic knowledge into real world. So that real world experiences, guys, will be with you for life, and they'll really shape you. And each one of them will teach you, and then you will create your nice, portrait of what you want to be doing with those experiences.
And so I love that I hadn't really thought that through about about when you do that kind of role. But now you're going into your career and you've found a field you like, you believe, you think
Right.
this is what you want to do. What's
Right.
your recommendation about what you would think through on what companies, what type of company? How do you pick the company to go to?
Well, this, of course, if it's in engineering, you want to choose a tech company. Now you got some experience. You've got to look at the company and what their goals are, and whether what you do is core or context. Because if what you do is a side role, then they might kill the project. It may not be important. It may not get the attention. So choose a company where your core skills fit with the core objectives of the company. Or later on, maybe you can go say, I'm going to do a mini startup in that company and teach them an area. But as you're early in your career, I think core is very important and you should be part of that core.
That's great advice. So one of the initiatives Martin is driving is grow the good in business. I think what the Notre Dame Business School has tried to do from the time I've been involved, 20 years ago this September, by the way, was,
Wow.
yeah, so
Happy
it's been a
anniversary.
long-term engagement here. But they've always, Carolyn Wu was the dean when I first got involved, and she said, I want to take the essence of Notre Dame, what it stands for, doing things the right way, and bring that into business. I want when people hire a Notre Dame graduate, they feel like they're getting a good person who happens to know business.
Wow.
And Martin is very much taking that to another level of social responsibility. Now I know that your firm participates in education and a number of other things. You want to comment a little bit about the importance of that and how that came about?
Yeah, no, at a personal level, we're big fans of if you do not invest in education and training, then the next generation won't be ready, right? And let's face it, Tom, you and I are the past generation, right?
Oh, come on. Yes.
Not to just speak of us chronologically, but now's the time for us to really influence what the
Yeah.
next generation, engineers, leaders, financial analysts, government politicians all look like. So it's a really important time. You're influencing the general statistics are the greatest influence you can have on people is between middle school and college. And then after that, they form their own opinions, right? But that's true for academics. But for industry, you can still shape them throughout their lives in various ways. So I really believe in internships. Our company really believes in giving back. With COVID, there's so many have-nots and haves. One of our biggest costs. I mean, if you can't get a basic meal, how are you going to worry about education? So my husband and I are big fans of making sure we solve hunger, because if you can create schools, for example, for women where they can get one meal, and then as a result of it, they can get education. You need basics before you can study and use your brain. So I encourage you all, as we're all more privileged, we're all more lucky, and we all have so much opportunity, and we're so blessed to pick what's close to your heart. And we do that at Arista, and especially at Second Harvest and Food Bank and Blood Bank and all of that. And the Arista Foundation matches this. And we all as people have our personal causes as well. It doesn't have to be big numbers. It can be whatever you can afford. It's the action that's more important than the size sometimes. because different people can afford different sizes.
Well, you said to me, one of the things you feel a little bad about is you're so busy, you're financially helping a lot of these, but you can't personally spend as much time as you used to. And we
No.
both would agree the people who spend their time and energy and put forth are actually the most admirable people of the whole
It's a very
food chain.
noble goal. I don't even know if I have the patience to do it because, when you're a nonprofit, you have to
Yeah.
be a lot more patient
Yeah.
on the decisions. So I look forward to helping there, but right now all I do is write checks, and that's a small token.
Which are appreciated, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
So at this time, I think, Natalie, I think we should move on to questions from the audience. And both of us will respond, but hopefully Jayshree will get most of them. And then later on, we'll have Martin close.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jayshree, for this fascinating conversation. I think all of us, whether students or others in our audience, will really have a lot to learn from and take away from today. I'd like to start with a question for you, Jayshree. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned mentors and how they've shaped and impacted your career. Which mentors would you say have most impacted your career? And what advice on mentors would you give to either students or folks who may be earlier on in their career?
Thank you, Natalie. In my case, I won't say there was a magic silver bullet of one mentor. And maybe it's just the way I synthesized information. But what I got out of mentorship was, some from my parents, some from my bosses, some from my professors, and some from my peers. And it's that collection of mentorship that meant more to me than one individual per se. If I had to pick one, it'd be a tough call. But and again, it was also in different phases of my life. So obviously, as a childhood and as a student, my parents had the greatest influence. As I was a newlywed and starting a family, my husband and the family had a huge influence. As I went into my professional careers, my family was still a very important pillar. But many of my bosses, I still remember when I made my shift from engineering to marketing, I was petrified because everything in engineering is, very binary. It's ones and zeros. Everything in business can be shades of gray. And I did not have the benefit of a great academic degree from Notre Dame or a proper MBA. I was taking classes while working because I couldn't afford it. And so one of my bosses just, he pulled out his map and he said, I know you're going on your first trip. This was before GPSs were formed. And he said, this is how you land in Boston, Logan. This is how you go, rent your car. And this is how you'll go on the Sumner Tunnel. And it still sticks with me. So mentorship isn't always just the career advice, but it's that first step and first break I got from engineering to business, right? And so I'd say it's been a collection of individuals and a collection of experiences, really.
Thank you. Tom, do you have any comments you'd like to add?
I think the best point I just heard Jayshree make, it's going to matter where you are in your life and what you're looking for before you pick a mentor. The gentleman that she just referenced was someone who knew how to travel and things. That happened to be a key thing. The other point that Jayshree said about the difference between engineering and non-engineering is living in the world of ambiguity. And she lives in the world of ambiguity. Hasn't got a better anybody I've ever met. And she would say that's one of the reasons for her success. Well, if you're looking for a mentor, find someone who understands things that you really think you should want to know. If I want to go do that job, I want to get to that level, try to meet somebody who can tell you what really that's about. Because sometimes you'll have this perception that's completely off to what that really is when you get there. And if they can share with you, and then you can say, wow, that is what I want to do, and give you some advice on people you could talk to. I oftentimes have students reach out to me and they'll ask for advice. I'm not the person who has the answers, but I can direct them to somebody on that, if they have the question right, that can really help them with this is how it really works. So that's why I advise people use your Notre Dame network. I find the Notre Dame network to be pretty phenomenal in the sense of most people respond and try to help you. And
So true.
It's been true for a long time.
To answer Natalie's question one more level, one of my greatest mentors was my professor, who taught the electrical engineering and electronics class. And I was telling Tom the story. Is that a story worth repeating? The one where
Yes, of
we all
course.
failed? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we took this class, and he made the tests really hard as an Italian professor because he wanted to see how we think. And we all failed. It was not graded on a curve, so we were all Fs, right? And for somebody who's used to doing pretty well in school, this can be a very demoralizing experience, right? So he came to class and he gave us all our final exams back and said, "You are all failures. You are not going to make it in the real world." This was supposed to be his way of inspiring us to do better, by the way. And then he proceeded to look at his pen and he said, "This pen I can teach better than all of you. It has more brains. So the rest of my class, I'm going to teach this pen." So it was very offensive. But you can see, since I'm talking about it many decades later, it had a lasting impact. And what he was trying to do in that class was try to, help us not just become book smart, but know how to apply that in the real world. And he really gave us all a jolt on we weren't really good real world engineers. By the way, he later on came to attended my farewell party at Cisco when I was leaving, and said, "You were always a quiet engineer, but I knew you had it in you to do more." I sure couldn't tell from that final exam I took and failed, but he Dr. Franco ended up being a mentor in his own subtle way. I realized it later.
Thanks, Jayshree. That's I think, a really helpful insight, especially for our students. And I think if we turn the tables a little bit and think about your perspective, and Tom, your perspective as an executive and as an experienced leader, when you are interviewing someone, what do you think are the most important questions for you to ask to get a sense of how well they'll do and how well they'll fit with the culture?
Oh, that's a good one. Because the techie questions just don't do it, do they? They'll tell you how smart they are. Um, you know the and neither does a resume ever tell you how they are. I look for some traits. It's back to what Tom said on ambiguity. So I like to ask them questions on what if. What if you had this particular problem? How would you handle it? And how they would handle things tells me more than their textbook knowledge. Um, and it also tells me more about how culturally adaptable are. You could give a good example of this would be somebody may be extremely data driven. And that's great for some jobs. But in business, if you're only data driven, by the time the data comes, you may lose the business. So you have to have the ability to iterate. So I look at an interview for characteristics like can you iterate? Can you deal with ambiguity? Can you extrapolate? Are you passionate and do you wear passion on your sleeve? Can you believe in a goal that looks impossible and then find steps to achieve it, right? Because I don't doubt they have the textbook qualities, but I look for that, you know, beyond the textbook. And one of the things that really helps when you interview a candidate is you you can also see how they respond. Like you may throw a curveball at them, and you see how they react to that. And some of the best answers, if they may say, I frankly don't know how to. I want to think about it some more, and that also tells me something that they're not just trying to give me a pat answer. They actually want to absorb the question. So I look for that X factor because I'm pretty sure they're smart and that's why they made it to the interview.
Yeah, I really like those points. The question that I ended up asking a lot is, tell me about your biggest failure and why did it happen? And the only thing I care about is do they take responsibility or blame somebody else? So if they said, look, I screwed up on this, then why did it happen? And they understand it and they take responsibility, they're not going to do that twice. And that's the kind of person I want working with me. We're all going to screw up. But I can't tell you how many times people say, well, so, I had this happen, but I didn't have a good boss. I gotta tell you, I gotta be honest with you. I gotta be honest with you, my boss was an idiot. That's what happened. And that's right. And then the second thing, and you said they gotta have passion. I'm looking for enthusiasm. I want them to have done their homework before they walked into that interview and tell me why they're gonna help my company. They should have done enough to say, I know your top 3 priorities. You're looking for growth, you're looking for this, and you're trying to do that. And I think I can help in these following ways. Not that they have the answers, But the worst thing you can do in an interview is come in unprepared and say, tell me what's in it for me. That's like, I'm not here to be in it for you. In fact, none of us are here to be in it for ourselves. We're here to build a great company. So if you walk in, make sure it's about that company. You've done your homework. You're not just there because you had nothing else to do that day. And you want to be passionate, and enthusiasm is a force multiplier. And Jayshree, we talked a little bit about when you guys hit the wall and had problems. We certainly did at NetApp. I can tell you, you want people who are all in. They want to know how we can get out of it. They're not looking for a place to run to, right? So and the things you were asking kind of get at that too.
Yeah.
But I 100% agree. I don't care about resumes because half of them are made up. You know what I mean? Nobody, if you can't make yourself look good in a resume, you got a real problem. And they're smart. By that way, we filtered that out. In the early days of NetApp, we were having trouble hiring engineers. And everybody, we were having no problem hiring sales guys. We were exploding upward. And so I volunteered to go over and sit through the engineering interviews. They showed up late, our guys. They brought them into a room. I went to three in a row, and they all asked the same questions. So they hadn't even talked, and they all tested to see how smart they were. Like, go to the board and figure out this equation. And I'm like, you showed up late. You didn't show any interest in who they were. And then you can't figure out why you're not getting acceptances. And so they said, well, we're not selling something exciting. I said, Cisco, all due respect. Cisco's selling plumbing. Come on. But they're super successful, and it's an exciting career to be part of something like that. And they put me in the loop of the thing. And we started hiring engineers with no problem because I took the time to ask them about themselves, this, that, and I got those answers without having to go to a board or test them. And when they showed up, people knew they were coming. They treated with respect. One of the things about that is if you don't hire somebody, you want them to have a good experience because they're going to go away and say, I really like Arista. They were nice. I understand. I didn't fit. That's, worst thing can happen is you get treated rudely. They don't care about you, don't know about you, and waste your time. And you're like, so.
Yeah, no, it's so true, Tom. I think setbacks teach you even more than success. And some of the, if you only experience success, you don't learn actually, because
right.
Sort of getting carried away by the tide, if you will. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Very well said. And it's easy in engineering to test the technical skills, but you have to learn how to apply the technical skills to the culture of the company and the culture of the individual, which is what you
Jayshree, tell the story you did about how your engineers don't just all do cool stuff.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Tell them how you came to that.
Yeah. So, company is very much built by engineers for engineers. When Ken Duda started the company, he was just passionate about building good products, good code. And you may think, well, obviously that's how it should be, but you'd be surprised how people lose track of that. So at Google, for example, they're told 20% of their time they can work on cool stuff. So many times my engineers will say, hey, what's our 20%? And my reply is 100% of the time, Arista, we work on cool stuff. So you don't need to peel out 20. But I want to peel out the right 20% for you guys to be customer support aware. Every single individual in Arista has to support customers, including engineers. Now, it doesn't thrill all engineers. The introverted engineer, in case they have to support a customer, will hurry up and support them, give them the right code, and run away. The extroverted engineer will go another step further and ask more questions, and we'll create a feedback loop, and we'll learn what we did wrong. So I say the hallmark of Arista is support is too important a function just to let the support team do, which is outstanding. They do a great job. But it's the job of every engineer, every executive, and I've taken 2 a.m. calls to deal with a crisis. So it's something, it's got to be always with you. But as you know, whether it's NetApp or Arista, the network and storage are so mission critical that your customer will be a hero if it works well, but he will very quickly be a zero if it doesn't. And that's when you need to be right there with them.
And the reason they buy from you is they believe you'll take that call.
That's right.
It's at a certain level. They won't replace you with anybody else if you take that call because they know the other guy. They don't know if the other person will, and it quite likely won't. So.
Thanks to you both, and delighted to know that all of our audience should be very, very well prepared to participate in an interview with you both. They just let you know not to show up late. Time for one final question, and I hope it's a fun one. What is the most helpful book, or let's say in this age of media, piece of media, that you've read or experienced or listened to for your career and maybe for yourself?
Wow, lately I haven't done much reading. And, to be honest with you guys, I love fiction because I do so much techie work. I take a break to read fiction more than I do. The book that I didn't read it recently, but it really taught me about, dealing with adversity. And it was actually, I think, an autobiography, was Hillbilly Elegy. It's about that Rust Belt town and how an individual went from adversity, being raised by his single mother and even grandmother, to Harvard, Ivy League. And while it wasn't a textbook on how the principles and characteristics needed to be in business, etc., there's lifelong lessons in that book in every chapter, and overcoming hardship, dealing with adversity, being mission focused and knowing what you want to do, and getting the right family support. So understanding that America, especially as we're going through these elections, isn't one America. There's so many different components to it, depending on whether you're in the financial district on the East Coast, or high-tech Silicon Valley, or in Pennsylvania. So that book really influenced me, because it was like that's a story that I could not necessarily relate to, but really understand, and how an individual's career was shaped by it.
And speaking for myself, I love well-written history that inspires me. So history is great, but it's got to be well-written, so it reads like a novel. It happens to be true. So I remember when I read Winston Churchill's 6 books on World War II. Now, right, he wrote it in 1947, 48, fresh in his mind. And it's like him speaking to you. And he takes you through how all the decisions he had to make, why he made them. And I mean, I found that the fact that he was able to lead through the crisis of the bombings and the whole thing. More recently, Unbroken, the book Unbroken by Laura Hildebrandt, about a guy who came from nothing and then he gets captured by the Japanese and what he went through. And it's, at the end of the day, it's a very uplifting book. Now we have a football game coming up tomorrow, you guys might know. And Clark Lee and I have become friends, who's your defensive coordinator. And Clark is a big reader. And we both share a book that inspired us called Boys in the Boat. And Boys in the Boat, I think, is a terrific book. I'd recommend to anybody. It's about this group of people who are underclass in Seattle and are rowing. And rowing is very much a rich person's sport. It's dominated by the East Coast Ivies and the powerhouse on the West was Cal. And they were recruiting the same kind of kids. And this guy, who had never coached before, took a group of people who worked all day in hard jobs and then got in a boat and rowed.
Wow.
And it's on them going to the Olympics in 1936. And when you row, everything has to be in order. Every role is important. And there's so many great lessons about teamwork and you're doing your role. And then it's like your book, Jayshree, it's uplifting that these people came from nothing, but they had grit. There's something we both look for in an interview, by the way. I didn't know how you say it, but grit is what wins in a startup. Grit is when people don't quit when they're down. They just refuse to lose. That's what you really want on a great team. I think we had that on the Notre Dame football team. I'm just saying that. So I'll leave it at that. And why don't we kick it back to Martin? Jayshree, first of all, thank you very much for you agreed instantaneously when I called you, and I appreciate that.
My
Very
pleasure.
generous today. I know how busy this has been, crazy week with your earnings and everything. Fabulous earnings. And thank you so much.
My pleasure. Nancy, Martin, Tom, Tom, you're one of my favorites. So thank you for having me. And it's an honor to be here today.
Thank you. So Natalie, thank you. And Martin, bring us home.
Yes, let me join you, Tom, in starting with thanking you, Jayshree. And also thank you, Tom, for sharing with us your wonderful, wide-ranging, super insightful conversation. Thank you for inspiring us through your conversation and letting us also witness your friendship. Jayshree, we're so honored by your participation in this event and very grateful for giving everyone watching the opportunity of learning from you. Tom, thank you for bringing Jayshree to our students and the college. It was a great event. I would also like to thank everyone who helped facilitate and communicate this event, especially Jean, Natalie, Carol, and Beth, the technicians at ND Studios, and our partners at the Alumni Association of Notre Dame. Finally, thank you everyone for watching. We hope to be back with another session of Tom Mendoza Presents in the spring semester, so please be on the lookout for our announcement about that. Have a great weekend and go Irish.
Go Irish. Thank you. Bye, everybody.